So
lack of support is huge in the post-op situation. We find so many people that family members, friends, like no, they have no one in their close circle that agrees with what they've done, and they're just left out there on an island. And that's where a lot of you find the buyer's remorse comes from, is people that just don't have the support, and that's why April and I started BariNation.
so here's so this is one that you can answer as much or as little as you want. I know you guys personal, I know you're a mere tidbit into your personal lives, but what was the experience? And again, to the extent you want to share or not, but your spouses or significant others, and I think I know a little bit. With Jason, but was there support or not? Was your significant other also a patient, and or was there a challenging relationship with food? What is the background of that person, and then how these two worlds collide pre-surgery and then remain interactive, or in engaged literally? How does it work thereafter?
Yeah.
The support system. So
I think Jason and I are very fortunate. Both of our spouses have been 100% in our corner, ride or die, whatever we need. My future husband at the time almost lost his life because when we first started dating, he asked me if I had ever considered bariatric surgery, and I damn near put him in his grave, because that was something that I thought only people who were 600 pounds did. I was convinced that I could, diet and exercise my way out of obesity. And he helped me on that roller coaster for 10 years, really for for the entire time we were dating, and then for a big chunk of our marriage. So when I really became educated and made the decision to have bariatric surgery, he was absolutely my number one supporter, number one fan. Whatever I needed, he was there for. Any modifications or anything that I needed, done in our house, or emotional support, he was there. And he was even able to kindly call me out when he saw that I was exhibiting behaviors that weren't healthy. He was able to say, oh, well, that's weird. You don't like beer, as I was sitting on a couch, drinking a can of beer. And he's like, I'm not like, you do you, boo, but you just don't like beer, So it's like, to have somebody there that is able to kind of give you that kind of accountability was priceless. And he remains the steadfast supporter in my life as a patient, and and as somebody growing BariNation.
Jason, just before you, I want you, of course, to answer. I'm fascinated with the beer thing because, again, the tidbits that I hear and I have insight to, it sounds like there's people who, much like the stories I hear of childbirth, they always enjoyed this food and then they hate it after this situation or physically traumatic situation. Was the beer thing just a fluke that you were like, I'm chillaxing with a beer, or did you suddenly, you did like beer, or was that a little displacement sort of? Is that a whole nother psychotherapist? We have to let Jason talk in 30 seconds, but
I'll just say I was having a really difficult time adjusting to bariatric life. I was feeling lost and alone. I was feeling disconnected. I was not understanding what life was all about. And I did not have the coping skills at the time to understand what I was experiencing. And I went to the grocery store one day and I saw a local brewery had a new beer, like Pog beer. And I was like, oh, that's what I'm going to get. And brought it home and sat down on the couch and cracked a beer and was sitting there, drinking it. And Grady got home from work and he's like, hey, what are you doing? And I was like, oh, it's a new Silver City, whatever, Pog beer. And he's like, oh, well, that's weird. And I was like, what's weird about it, bro? Starting to get all like, oh. And he was like, you don't like beer. And I was like, oh, yeah. Which I don't. I like German beer, but I don't like beer. So it was in that moment he was able to help me see, I was engaging in some behaviors that was not aligned to the bariatric life that I wanted to lead, or just to who I was as a person.
Okay. All right. And Jason, if you would share to your comfort, your experience and your journey with your spouse, your wife.
My wife has always been one to let me know when I was doing a little too much. So we've tried every diet together. We've had, I didn't really struggle with my weight until I had health issues when I was like 25 or 26, I think it was or maybe, no, 27, I guess I was, when I really started having serious issues that I gained over 100 pounds, about 130 pounds in about 8 months.
Wow.
And so with those came kind of behaviors that I started kind of piling on, and my wife's kind of like, hey man, like we need to do something about this. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. So we would diet, we would do the things and kind of go through the role. And it was for me just as much as it was her. Like we did it together. We always wanted to have that kind of a united front. And then the funny thing is when it came to surgery, that was for other people, not for me. Like what April said, like I watched my 600-pound life to make myself feel better, because I'm like, well, at least I'm not like those people. When in reality, I was those people. Like I was that. I didn't realize I had an addiction to food until after I had surgery. And then I realized I couldn't have it anymore. And it was a problem for me. And I actually had surgery because I was trying to talk my wife out of it, and I talked myself into it. Because my wife was going to have it, and she was like, well, my insurance at work doesn't cover it, so I'm just going to go to Mexico and get this done. Well, at the time, I didn't know anything about any of it. And I knew that medical tourism was a thing. But when you tell me I'm going to go to Mexico and get half my stomach cut out, I'm like, and probably a kidney or something too, and they're going to sell it on the black market. You're going to wake up in a bathtub full of ice. Like, we're not going there, because what happens if you have problems and you can't go back, and like there's a whole thing. And in doing the research for it, I realized that not only did my insurance at work cover it, but I had gone to a cardiologist appointment, and this doctor had never seen me before, didn't read my chart, didn't do anything. And I'm 470 pounds at the time when he comes in the office, and he takes one look at me and he's like, have you ever thought about bariatric surgery? And I'm like, bro, you don't know me. Like, you didn't look at my chart. You don't know me. Like, I'm not sitting there out of breath from just existing. Like, like my blood type's not chocolate milk at the time. And he's like, when he finally, like, when I go back to my primary care doctor, I'm like, can you believe this guy said this? And she looked at me and she's like, you qualify. And I'm like, what do you mean I qualify? And she started like going through my chart and looking at me, and she's like, listen, she's like, you're 44 years old. You're actively dying right now. Like, you're not getting out of this. Like, this isn't going to work. Like, if you see 50, you'll be extremely lucky. Well, I had a brand new grandbaby at the time. I've got kids. Like, my son hadn't even graduated high school yet. So at that point, I'm like, I got to do something. And my wife's like, let's do this. Like, what do we have to do? Let's get up. Like, so she was extremely on board the whole time. I was lucky enough to have my entire family and friend group rally around me and get me across the finish line when I really, not only was I adamant I didn't need it, but then I didn't even know how to go about it. So I was really helped in a big way by my friends and family.